Welcome, everybody, to the Sparks Podcast, where we explore what sparks creativity, inspiration, insight, and meaning in life. Once again, I'm your host, Nick Ross, and I'm excited to introduce today's guest, Neil Baird. Neil is a strength coach from Metanoia Barbell, and we have an inspiring conversation about how strength training and weightlifting can be extremely transformational, not only just for the body, but for the mind, your cognition, and the way that you see, participate, and show up in the world. Neil is also a jazz musician, and we weave our conversation around the relationship between music and strength training and mindfulness and coaching and philosophy. We also dive deep into our experience of the Circling into Dialogos workshop, which is where I met Neil. It's a workshop run and led by University of Toronto professor and award-winning lecturer John Vervaeke, whose work on cognitive science and the study of wisdom and Buddhism, who has had a deep influence on both Neil and I, which you'll hear come out in this conversation. And I actually reached out to John to see if it would be okay if I used a clip from his series After Socrates, where he discusses the idea of metanoia and kind of what it is. And he also talks about the logos a little bit, which will come up in this conversation. So I appreciate John allowing me to use this clip, which will be played right after the intro, and then I'll get into the conversation with Neil. So thanks to Neil for a great conversation, as well as thank you to you, the listeners, for watching and listening, and I hope you enjoy today's episode.
That metanoia is directed to what really matters, phronesis, what really matters in this situation. Waking people up from their performative contradictions, waking them up to the difference between purity codes and moral codes, and that only moral codes are conducive to cultivating wisdom and responsive to reality. Logos is much more an exercise in transformative labor, co-trained with the other training of phronesis, the co-orientation with others, that Antisthenes taught. That co-orientation, Antisthenes, is about, right, remember the harmonious conversations, it's about ratio religio with other people. And that is more important than argument or agreement. In between argument and agreement is this other thing, the ratio religio of co-orientation, so that we can train together in becoming more Socratic, more virtuous. And remember, this all circles around back to being able to internalize this into your inner speech, internalize Socrates.
Yeah, it felt right, like that. That changing perspective, that turning into a new way of being. I thought it like described my perspective on training, and also like what I want to share with the world, I guess.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that the important part to me of the metanoia is this, like reorientation aspect of it, right? Where you're kind of going along in life one way, and then there's this, I don't know whether it's like a process of metanoia or a happening or this participation aspect. And then there's kind of like this shift, this reorientation towards, what would you say that like shifting is towards?
It's like it's a perspectival shift, right? Like it's changing how you're seeing, like how you are seeing and being in the world, right? And yeah, I think strength training, like changing how your body operates, does that. It does change how you see things.
Right. So for you, like, when did you come upon the lifting, the strength training yourself?
Something I've been doing since high school. Like most 18-year-old kids, you want to get jacked for the girls, right? But I didn't really get serious about it until the think like university or something. Like I went to school for music, but I was also lifting while I was doing that too. Then I learned the hard way that you don't make money with a music career, especially a jazz music career.
Right.
That's when I decided to try lifting instead. Try coaching, I mean.
Right. I see. So it was already something that was like a part of you, a part of who you were. And then with the music, you said you were a jazz musician, and I'm wondering how like the jazz musician and the music and the lifting, did they kind of bleed in at all, or?
I think so, but it has more to do with like my personality in general. Like I've always been a bit of a contrarian by nature. Like I always, like as soon as you tell me how to do something, I immediately want to do it a different way. I want to play with stuff and break it. And I think that's why I was attracted to jazz, right? Because it's all about playing broadly within a form or within a structure. It's not necessarily about doing things correctly, right? And I think that also shows up in my approach to lifting and coaching, where it's not about a rigid methodology. It's more about the exploration and just exploration.
Yeah, it brings in that serious play element.
Yeah,
right. Which which I we've kind of talked about a lot of this before, but I'm going to be enjoying re-exploring this with you. And that was one thing that you mentioned about, I think we had a topic once of like, where do you find serious play? Right. And all these aspects. And you said about the lifting, right? Of like, there's a right way to do it, but then there's another kind of, I guess, orientation towards being playful with it and playing within the structure.
Yeah. So like, for example, in the barbell squat, like usually people will be taught that there's like a single correct way to do it. You have to put your stance in the correct spot. You have to like move your knees in the correct way. But another way to approach it is to play with it, right? To like play with your squat stance, to move it out, to move it in, point your toes out more, point your toes out, like in, and just see what feels most comfortable. And the more you do that, you'll eventually self-organize into what's correct.
That's interesting. So instead of following this kind of form that you might see, or you might kind of be told to kind of fit in a certain way, it's more of like learning through like the wisdom of your body kind of thing, like almost like this trusting that it knows in some way.
Yeah. So like one way to think of it is that like your body is naturally lazy, right? It always wants to do things.
Yeah, you don't have to tell me twice.
Yeah, me too. Like it always wants to do things using the least amount of energy, the most efficient way to do it. So in like a squat, like your body will just naturally trend towards more efficient movement patterns. And the way to do that is to explore. And the more you explore and play with it and experiment, the more you will naturally start to move into where things need to be.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's so many benefits. I mean, the obvious one is physical, right? Like physical strength and just movement in general. And so like, what are the other benefits? I mean, we could go into a little bit more bodily if you want some of the benefits of that. And then maybe we could shift into kind of the cognitive benefits too, and how they kind of relate together.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously physical strength is important. Like one way to think of it is that like everything you do is dependent on your muscles' ability to produce force, right? So like the stronger you are, the more, more stuff you're capable of, right?
Right, right.
Yeah, like strength is, it's how you move through the world. It's how you interact with the world. It's fundamental, right? Uh, so yeah, just being stronger means you're capable of more things with your life.
Right. I think there's also an aspect, I think you mentioned this before too, of like doing something that's hard or doing something that you don't want to do. And it's almost like, yes, you're training your muscles to do that, but you're also training your mind to also do something that's hard, do something that you don't want to do.
Yeah, exactly. A common phrase here in the fitness industry is like getting comfortable being uncomfortable, right?
Right, right.
Um, there's more to it than that. Like a really common thing you'll hear people say is that they learned the value of hard work, right? They learned how to push themselves, how to work hard towards something meaningful. And I think another way to think of that is in terms of like virtue,
Right, okay.
right? Like going all the way back to Aristotle, right? So like you can think of learning the virtue of diligence, like learning the virtue of persistence and patience. And by like regularly practicing these things in the gym, like day in and day out, they start to sink in and become like part of you, right?
Like an embodiment of those virtues in a way that's not just talking about them, not just saying, oh, I'm doing this or doing that or what they are, but this actual embodiment of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like in the same way that you don't learn how to play an instrument by reading lots of facts about it. Right? You have to,
right.
You have to sit down and practice it. You have to get it into your body.
Right.
It's the same thing with virtue. Like you need to practice it, so it actually becomes part of you, part of your body.
Interesting. So yeah, like lifting being a way, or exercise in general, of being a way of like embodying virtue. That's a really, I guess, I want to say unique aspect to it. Like it doesn't seem like that's something, you don't see that on like the fitness magazines, right? Like, oh, become more virtuous by exercising or lifting. So how have you found like being in the fitness industry? Because I know there's a lot of kind of surface, I guess, bullshit, the technical term, as John would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Like what you said, bullshit. Like the technical definition of that is that, like it's about capturing people's attention. And like it doesn't, like truth doesn't matter when you're bullshitting someone. It's just trying to capture their attention. So you have more opportunity to manipulate money out of them or something, right?
Right, right.
And yeah, that's like, I guess I don't consider myself as part of the fitness industry.
Right, okay.
Because yeah, it's very focused on, I mean, it's an industry like any other, right? Its first priority is making money, which is fair enough, but I feel like I'm after something a little more than that.
Yeah, it seems like I would almost be tempted to say like something like a transformational coach rather than just fitness coach. Would that be kind of accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what a coach should be. Is you're trying to afford transformation to your client, right? In most cases, like in a more traditional sense, it's physical transformation, but
right.
I think a good coach should also have that more, for lack of a better word, spiritual transformation.
Right, right. I see. And I guess that's where metanoia starts to come back in. This kind of, like, it's almost like at first the orientation is around, oh, I just want to get like, stronger, a bit more healthy. And then you get caught up in this transformation that changes like the way you are at a deep, deep level, which is, I would say, probably unexpected from a lot of people. Or do you think people are aware of that?
I think for those that pay attention to it, like it, yeah, definitely. Because that was something I always noticed as a coach, is just how much it changes people, and like always for the better, right? It always changes people for the better. And I was just struck by that. Like, it seemed like that was the almost more important than the physical side.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. So it's almost like you're like a transformational coach in like this lifting strength coach is like, it's almost a capturing, but towards the good, right? It's like you're capturing them with a certain orientation, but it's in the best way for this transformation kind of upward momentum.
Yeah. Like, because it's not me telling people how to be or what to be or who to be, right? It's guiding people through the process of the thing that, like, they learn how to be, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So say that again. So it's not about telling them. I guess that would be maybe like John's idea of like education, educe and eduction kind of thing, where
Yeah.
it's not like you're filling in.
Yeah. Like, that's something I do want to be very careful about, is that I'm not telling people who and what they should be. It's like the process itself is the transformational aspect of it, where it's almost like you discover yourself. Or a word that comes up a lot is cultivate, right?
Cultivate.
You're cultivating yourself.
Interesting. So can you say a bit more about that? Like in what way is it like a cultivation?
Well, like in the same way that you cultivate a plant, right? You don't make it grow. You don't force it to grow in a specific way. You feed it food and water and sunlight and allow it to grow. And I think it's kind of the same way with yourself. You just feed it stuff. In this case, like experience. You're just feeding yourself, your body, new experience, and that grows you.
Yeah, I think that was really well said. I like that. I like the plant reference too, because obviously I garden as a hobby too. So that's a metaphor that works for me, that resonates with me. So when you're coaching, so I guess so you mentioned like the kind of metaphor of the cultivation, like the plant. So there's obviously like a nutritional aspect of it, I would assume, or like what are the kind of aspects that you focus on with your process?
I'd say like the foundation of it is like mindfulness. Because again, it's all about the experience of the thing, right? And like, it's really easy to not be present in the experience, right? You get lost in thought or something, and you're not there. You're not. You're just not present in it. And so that's where mindfulness comes in, where you're directly experiencing the feeling of the weight on your back, the feeling of your balance as you descend in a squat or something. The feeling of patience, of persistence, these virtues, right? Like feeling them in your body.
Yeah, I resonated a lot with that, and especially when you brought in the mindfulness, right? That's it's something that's very, I guess, salient right now. It's very popular right now, but there's different aspects of mindfulness. We both heard the term the McMindfulness. So what would maybe be the difference between, like, I don't know, the McMindfulness from kind of a deeper mindfulness?
I mean, not that I'm an expert in this at all.
Right.
My understanding of it, like a lot of the contemporary understanding of mindfulness, is that it's a method for relaxation.
Yeah.
It's a method for de-stressing and making yourself more comfortable. And fair enough, that's part of it, right? Like, but obviously that's not what's going to happen when you're underneath a 300-pound squat or something, right?
Right.
You'll relax. If anything, it might make it harder, right? Because your mindfulness is all about putting yourself more directly in the experience of the thing itself.
Interesting. Yeah, I like that That's a great comparison, because people might wonder, well, this relaxation element of mindfulness or meditation, well, how does that transfer to being under the bar, right? You gave a great imagery there that you're under the bar, and it's not like you want to just like relax and sit still and meditate, right?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting aspect where it's this embodying and feeling into the experience of where you are.
Yeah. Like really feeling the feeling of the weight. Like, what does it feel like to have 300 pounds in your back?
Right.
Like the whole like emotional experience of that, like being present and being curious about it. What does it actually feel like to feel that like apprehension as you're stepping under the bar?
Yeah, I like that you brought in that element of curiosity, because I think that is almost like an orientation in itself.
Yeah.
Right. Like curiosity being like, okay, you're just trying to get through the workout, which I mean, fair enough. If you're just trying to do it, you have time constraints or, kids or some sort of other running around to do. I think that's fair enough. But there's another element of this curiosity of, like you say, like what's happening in the experience while you're doing it.
Yeah. Just being curious, like, because there's just so much that happens like when you're underneath a heavy barbell, right? Like there's all sorts of emotions, all sorts of sensations, all sorts of stuff that you can pay attention to and be curious about and learn from.
Yeah. And I would imagine you learn a lot about yourself through that too. If again, if you cultivate this mindfulness, and as you're lifting the weights or doing these certain, I guess you'd almost call them, like, I'm almost tempted to say like asanas, like yoga. You're doing these certain, like, I guess, like not poses, but these certain, what would you call them? Structures, moves?
I mean, I just call them a lift, but
right. Okay. Different
like
lifts.
in some sense, I do think of them as almost analogous to like qigong movements or something.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. Where it's, again, it's different. Like I'm not saying that they're the same, but
yeah,
like it's analogous in that is like a slow, careful movement, where you're like focusing on balance, focusing on posture, focusing on just the whole thing, I guess.
Yeah, and it brings to mind for me just this idea of bleed. And I know we've talked about that quite a bit. So I'm wondering if you could kind of talk about that. I know John talks about these practices that bleed into your life, and I'm wondering if you wanted to kind of speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, that's something like I'm still kind of puzzling my way through, because there's something like a squat doesn't quite have the same what's the word? Like in qigong, when you're like enacting flowing water or something like that, right? There's this whole imaginal
right
aspect to it, right? Where you're enacting the water such that you gain a new perspective. But like a squat doesn't quite have that, and like a squat, it's also not really a skill per se. Like I think there's like it requires a certain amount of skill, but it's not a skill in that it connects you to something outside. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I see. Like it's not quite qigong as in like this imaginal. It's not like you're like squatting thinking that you're like Atlas holding the world or doing some sort of imaginal practice in that, I guess. Although I have heard, I forget who it was. I think it was Rogan actually, who was talking about sometimes when he's working out, he actually like imagines himself like defending his family, or like doing some sort of, oh no, I gotta like run for my life, or I gotta which seems like it adds a bit more of the imaginal element into it.
Yeah, there's ways to do it, but it's not quite as built into the movement itself like it is in qigong.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it's not still adding to that whole aspect of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Because there's a distinction between a skill and a capacity.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Right. So like dunking a basketball isn't necessarily, it's a skill. It's a capacity of your body. If you're like 6.5 feet tall and you have a huge vertical jump, then a dunk is really easy for you. Right.
Right. Right.
So it's a capacity. And I think strength is a capacity. It's your ability to exert force on the world and move your body through it, and stuff like that. And that actually like does change how you perceive the world, right? Like there's this idea that if you put a heavy backpack on people and put them in front of a steep hill, they'll perceive the hill as steeper than it actually is.
Right. Okay.
And I think you can infer the inverse of that, right? That if you make a person stronger, they're going to perceive the world as more open for action. It's more open to them.
Yeah, I think that's a really, I just want to pause there for a minute because I think that right there is maybe more powerful. I don't want to skim past it, I guess is what I'm saying, right? Because I think there's a lot of juice there, a lot of emphasis that I want to kind of just hold on to for a second. Because what it sounds like you're saying too is this, like it essentially changes the world that you see and you perceive. So essentially like it changes your perception of the world in a way that it's, I guess maybe like more connected or more like, what would you call that?
More potential for connection.
Right.
So again, it's like a capacity is different than a skill. So like having greater capacity means you have more opportunity to learn skills, which gives you more opportunity to connect with the world.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it does. And I like that distinction. I think that's important because there's some people who might think, oh, I can do anything. Right. And it's like, okay, that mindset I think is good to a point, right? Like this kind of belief in that I have this ultimate potential and I can fulfill it. But I think there's also this aspect of like your limitations and constraints just by who you are. Like if you're, 4'9", are you going to be an NBA player? Okay.
Probably not going to be a good dunker.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so then like that would be hard to say, oh, dunking is a skill because if you're 5'4", 5'9", like no matter how much well, maybe 5'9", okay. But like if you're like 5 foot, like how like no matter how long you work at that, you can't really develop that skill.
Yeah. But you can develop the capacity, right? To some degree, I think, I don't remember exactly, but like you can improve your vertical jump a little bit.
Right. Like in relativity to kind of like, to who you are. And okay, maybe you drop the net down a little bit, but you can, improve yourself in an upward direction and where you're able to dunk, maybe not on a, whatever it is, 9 foot, 12 foot. I don't know what the nets are at, but
I don't know what it is either.
The basketball metaphors don't really translate as much for me. So yeah, I'm interested in that. I guess the coaching aspect for a second, like what would you say makes a good coach?
So I think we've talked about this. Like I think of a coach as being almost analogous to like a parent. Whereas, right, like what you're trying to do is grow the person in the same way the parent is trying to grow their kid into like a capable, competent human being, right? That's sort of what you're doing in coaching. Like a parent has to be like a generalist sort of by nature, whereas a coach is more specific within a specific niche. So I think about like the different forms of love.
Right.
We've talked about this.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to get into this. So yeah, go ahead.
So like the eros and philia and agape. And like with agape, it's all about creating a space, like such that the person has room to explore and uh, like what you said earlier about the constraints.
Yeah.
Right? Like this idea of dynamical systems theory and constraints and um, affordances and stuff like that.
Yeah. So can we pause for a second? So I like that. So we've got these, it's the three kinds of love, right? There's eros, and then there's the philia, and then there's agape. So maybe we'll end with agape a little bit, because that's like a big juicy one. So maybe let's talk a little bit of what eros is.
Okay. Again, I'm not an expert on any of this.
For sure. We're working on this together, right? So we're
yeah, this is my understanding of it.
Right.
So eros, like it's the root of the word erotic, but it doesn't necessarily mean sexual. Like I think eros actually means to eat.
Right. Or to consume, I believe.
Like, yeah, that's where consummate comes from. Right. So it's all about, consuming and thinking of it like when you're super passionate about something and you want to consume it, you want to make it part of yourself, right? In the same way that when you eat food, it becomes part of your body.
Right.
So when you feel like erotic love for something, you want to like experience it as fully and deeply as you can so that it becomes part of who you are.
Yeah, like you don't love a cookie, a friend, and your spouse the same kind of love, right?
Yeah.
I love John's metaphor like that. So yeah, there's eros, the consuming, the kind of becoming one with by consuming and a part of you. And then there's philia. So maybe you can talk a bit about philia.
Yes, philia is like, so it's usually like brotherly love, right? So it's like you're standing shoulder to shoulder with someone in pursuit of something outside of you. And it's the root of the word philosophy, right? Like philia, Sophia, it's the love of wisdom.
Right. Philia being the love of friendship or fellowship, and then Sophia being wisdom. So like the love of wisdom.
Yeah, the fellowship love of wisdom. Yeah, when you're like standing shoulder to shoulder with a peer or something. Yeah, like in pursuit of something outside of you, I think. Sort of like what we're doing here, I think, right?
Yeah, like this starts to fall, like, because in the past with these podcasts, it's been generally interview style, and even when I messaged you about doing this, it was to kind of initially start off interview style, but then I think from our experiences together, and we'll get into more kind of how we came to be in contact, I think it turns into this kind of dialogos, this kind of philosophy, this philia sophia, is us kind of standing here working together, being like, yeah, we don't know all of these things, but what we're going to do is we're going to explore these topics together and actually help each other get a better understanding of things, rather than kind of debate each other or to try and prove a point or to try and, teach the other person something that you think is right or that you understand. It's like this mutual exploration.
Yeah. Well, I think like Dialogos is like a shared flow state, right?
Right. Okay. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. Say more about that.
Well, like when you get into a super deep and meaningful conversation with someone, and you get into like a flow, but it's like the flow state, but it's shared with another person.
Right. So because there's like say rock climbing, you can get into that flow state. There's a lot of like individual sports where you can get like kind of into a flow state with yourself, and you're talking
lifting,
about right lifting, yeah, and then you're talking about kind of dialogos being this shared flow state.
Yeah, and all the stuff that goes along with that, right? Like the flow state is like an incredibly potent thing for humans.
as John says, pay attention to universals, right? The flow state, it's like it exists in all, like, you know, in races and languages and forms and in all these ways. It's like across the board, it's a universal. And he always says, pay attention to what's universal.
Mm.
So I like that, the Dialogos being the flow state. And I think that's something that, yeah, like we've kind of come to explore between, you know, us and Philip. So we'll get into the John workshop soon, but we'll go into the agape a little bit before then.
Yeah.
So that's the third kind of love.
Yeah. And agape is like the love a parent has for their child. And it's what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, like it's unconditional. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
It's and it's like affording transformation to the person it is offered to, right? So like when a parent loves a child, like the point of it is so that the child grows and becomes like an actual person, right?
Right.
Like they go from a screaming ball of, you know, mucus to like an actual person who can, you know, take meaningful action in the world.
Right. So you're saying this, a child comes out and they're pretty much, I don't know, like defenseless.
Useless.
They're just, yeah. Well, I mean, useless might be a strong word, but essentially, yeah, it's like the function in society, like they're completely at the mercy, right? They need to depend on parents and loved ones, because I think sometimes we can also assume that it's just a parent, but it can be like a guardian or some sort of caregiver in some way. But what you're saying is almost like this agape, this love in that way, is like a container in which a person grows into and actually has room and space to develop. And I think there's an element of maybe like reflection of like seeing, like a kid sees their parents do something and then they kind of start to like reflect it. There seems like an element of reflection in that too.
Yeah. Well, and that's where the meaning of eros in our culture gets sticky, right? Because I think that would be erotic love, like when you admire someone and try to be more like them, right?
That's eros. See. Okay, interesting. So then it starts to shift. So there's almost like this agapic love, which is this container, but even within that, there's still this element of the eros, this kind of, I want to become like you, or I want to, emulate you or mirror you in some way. So you'd kind of consider that more of like the eros rather than agape.
Yeah, I think so. And I think all three of these are like vital for coaching.
Right.
So like as a coach, you are trying to create a space for your client to explore and learn and grow. And, but at the same time, you also, like ideally the client will admire the coach, right?
Right.
To become more like the coach or learn from the coach.
Mm-hmm.
And as the client grows and learns more and becomes more competent and capable, then it becomes more of a peer relationship, right? Where you're both in pursuit of the goal or whatever.
Right. I see. Okay, cool. So I like that. So there's this agape is kind of the coach towards the student, or the, I don't know what you'd call the trainee, or whatever context, the kid, the child, or whatever metaphor you want to use in this context. And then, so the agape is kind of like top down, kind of like that. And then the eros is kind of this bottom up, like, trainee to coach, of this emulation and trying to kind of become more like you in this way. And then somewhere in between is philia.
Yeah. And eventually you meet somewhere in the middle, right? This is where like training becomes more of a collaborative process.
Right. Okay.
Like once the client knows what they're doing, they don't need so much help. You don't need to correct them on every single rep or stuff like that. And you can just talk and get into that Dialogos, right?
Right. Yeah, no, that's cool, because it makes me wonder about if you like train a friend, right? If you have philia first, if you have that friendship first, and then you go into training, does that make it a bit more complicated to kind of have that dynamic?
I coach both my parents. And,
Oh, do you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it definitely makes the dynamic weird sometimes.
Right. Right. Okay. Interesting. So then because there's like the different relationship, because then that's interesting, because you almost have this agapic kind of orientation towards them, but then that's kind of flipping it around, because, throughout life, as you grow, it's like they're kind of directing this agapic love towards you. And then all of a sudden you start training them and it starts to shift around in this way. So how have you found that?
It's just interesting, like being a metaphorical parent to your parents, right?
Right.
It's a bit weird, but also just really, really gratifying being able to like provide them health into their old age, right?
Yeah, I would imagine the coaching and being able to see that transformation in people would be something that's really, really rewarding.
Yeah. Yeah, like just the other day, my mom was talking about how she went biking, and afterwards she took her bike and lifted it up and put it up on like a hook or something.
Yeah.
And how that's easy for her now. Right. Like didn't even need to think about it. It was it's just easy when you're stronger. Right.
Right. There's that bleed coming through again.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, those little moments where you just realize like, oh, I couldn't have done that before.
Yeah, I think that like, she recognized that at the time, where it was like, oh wow, okay, I didn't even think about that, but that was something I couldn't do before.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine that those moments of recognition would be important.
Yeah, very much so.
To kind of feed back into that motivation too, and just like, I guess, an element of seeing how far you've come and being like kind of proud of yourself, or
Yeah, well, that's another thing too we can talk about is motivation.
For sure.
Big thing in the fitness industry, obviously.
Yeah, like
definitely. How do you motivate your client? And the more like the ubiquitous model is that you just focus really hard on the thing you want, right? And then you just willpower yourself in order to get to it. And like it's very extrinsically motivating, or it's a heavy focus on the extrinsic motivating factors, and there's this psychological theory of what is it now? Self-determination theory.
Right. Okay.
Have we talked about this before?
Not too much.
So it's like the theory of like extrinsic and intrinsic motivation.
Oh yeah. We have talked about that. Yeah. Definitely go into the differences between those for sure.
Yeah. So like extrinsic is all about like getting the thing you want. Like in like fitness, it's all about like wanting the perfect body, wanting the super heavy squat, or wanting wanting the thing,
the beach body kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Whereas intrinsic motivation is all about like, what is the motivating factor within the thing itself, like in the experience and the process of like training itself. And so self-determination theory talks about like three psychological needs,
right? Okay.
That people have, and when you are meeting these psychological needs within something, then you become intrinsically motivating or intrinsically motivated.
Right. Okay.
So it's you want feelings of autonomy, competence, and connectedness.
Okay. So autonomy, connectedness. What was the other one?
Competence. So like
Competence.
feeling like you're getting better at it, right?
Right. So autonomy, connectedness, and competence. See, it's hard to listen. Surprisingly, it's hard to sometimes listen, and that's where the the reflection and circling stuff comes in. But okay, so autonomy, connectedness, and competence. So autonomy being
it's feeling like that you have some degree of control, right? That's like a lot of coaches, including myself, like I used to coach this way. It's very like, I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it and you have to do it my way. It's very like authoritarian almost.
right. Yeah.
And so, it doesn't leave a lot of room for autonomy.
Made me think of parenting.
Yeah.
Right. Like
exactly.
so sometimes people have parenting styles that are very authoritative and kind of just do it my way because I say so, because I'm the parent and I know best and that.
Yeah. And so what you want to do, both as a coach and a parent, I think, is again, you're creating a space for people to explore their own, like autonomously on their own, just learn and experiment. So for example, like when I'm coaching, I'll often tell people like just play with your squat stance. Like I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I just want you to focus on your squat stance and just play with it and just see what you can learn. And so I'm handing off autonomy to them, allowing them to learn on their own. But I'm creating like a space, right? I'm constraining it within a space.
Yeah, like you're not going to let them, do something crazy where they're going to injure themselves. So you do have the boundaries, almost like it reminds me of like bowling when you put up the little what are they, the gutter protectors, right? The blow up protectors, and it's like, okay, you can still throw the ball, you can still aim, but like I got these gutter protectors on that are going to kind of keep you safe within the bounds, but still allow you your own kind of feeling like you're bowling, that you're kind of playing within that.
Yeah, exactly. And that ties into competence too, right? Because when you feel like when you're playing with your squat stance and you feel like you found the right one, right? Like you feel like you've accomplished something, you feel like you've gotten better at it.
Right. So those two kind of play into each other, being this autonomy. Again, I'm just thinking about this kid bowling, so I'm just going to go with this metaphor for a second of, you also don't want to be the bubble parent where, you collapse those borders in where they can only go straight, right? And then once they kind of, develop that exploration, you want to kind of, I guess, be dynamic with them, move a little bit with them. And then once they kind of become more confident, then you can kind of take those down. You can just let them kind of, maybe give them a bit of a bigger ball, a bit more. And then that is actually what gives confidence, is being able to actually move through those levels.
Yeah. Like as a coach, you're creating these constraint spaces. And then as they become more competent, you slowly open it up. Right.
Right.
And I think that also ties into like connection, right? Like the relationship between the client and the coach is, I think, very important. Like genuinely talking to them, like allowing them to have like input on what they're doing, what they want to be doing, and stuff like that.
And I would guess probably where they're at too, because I would imagine there might be an element of like, I don't want to say therapeutic element, but I guess this kind of understanding where people are at too. And it would be beneficial to understand emotions and the kind of soft skills, I guess, in that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Like lifting is like, I do think it's inherently like emotional experience. And rather than trying to close them off for the sake of more efficient progress or something, like allowing the emotion to be present. Like when you fail a lift and you get pissed off, or when you're feeling apprehensive about getting underneath something heavy, like not dismissing that, not trying to get rid of it, but just allowing it, being present in it. Again, going back to like the mindfulness stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a key part that I think that's, again, it comes back to this kind of almost Socratic self-knowledge kind of aspect, right? It's like learning, because I mean, that could be another kind of meta layer of this is, okay, you're lifting and then all of a sudden you get really pissed off. It's like, how do you face adversity? How do you face failure? All of a sudden you fail, and then you all of this emotion comes up from maybe when you failed when you were a kid, or, like not feeling good enough, and all of these aspects of what it means to be human start to come out. And then, so what you're saying is this element of not like dismissing that, not invalidating that, but actually incorporating that into the process.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to practice feeling these things, right? Like when you're like nervous about something, you're a musician, right? So when you get nervous before a show, and like you allow the nervousness to sort of take over, right? And you play worse for it or something, right?
Right.
Whereas if you like regularly practice feeling nervous in the gym, right? That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's almost like exposure therapy.
Right.
The more you practice feeling nervous and apprehensive, the less control it has over you.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So yeah, I like that. Cause I mean, it's definitely, I resonate that with, because I do get obviously nervous before performances. I've tried to, I guess, change the relationship between that a little bit. Right. And rather than it being like a feedback loop where it's like, okay, I'm getting nervous, and then it kicks in this anxiety, and then your performance is going to be worse. So then you get more anxious because you're going to be worse. And it kind of gets out of, it's this feedback loop that keeps going. And not to say it doesn't happen, because it definitely still happens. But I guess when I'm mindful, I'm able to kind of recognize that. And then I find, maybe, and this is a proposal more than it is something that I'm actually able to do all the time, but maybe being with that emotion of nervousness, or that feeling of nervousness, it prevents it from escalating, and it more keeps it, I guess, like close, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's like a stoic thing, right? Where you're allowing and accepting your emotions as they are, such that they don't have power over you.
Yeah, I think there's a tricky line there sometimes in Stoicism, right? This kind of repression versus being with them. So that's interesting what you say there, right? The Stoic isn't that you don't have these emotions, because I think that can sometimes be this idea of Stoicism being this cold, kind of dead, like I don't feel nothing bothers me. But that's not what you're saying.
Yeah, well, especially like the contemporary understanding of Stoicism, where it's getting rid of all my emotions so I can work harder and make more money and all that.
Yeah, interesting.
Whereas, if I remember correctly, like Stoicism is more about, accepting things as they are.
So do you still get nervous when you take on new clients, or when you're kind of coaching?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah. I still get nervous lifting.
Oh, do you? Yeah.
Yeah. Anytime I squat more than 315, I still have a little, again, it's not enough to disrupt things. Like it's not, it's still there.
Yeah. And I would imagine, again, going back to this idea of accepting these emotions and feelings, like I would say that nervousness probably has a good purpose, right? Like it prevents you from overdoing it or going beyond your limit in a way that's going to injure you as well.
Yeah. Again, going back to like Aristotle, the city of like the golden mean, that like um, like courage is a really important thing in lifting, right? Like you need to get underneath something heavy once in a while. And like, yeah, having the courage to do that, but it's possible to have too much courage.
Right.
You want to be balanced somewhere in the middle, because yeah, there's plenty of stories about, the skinny bro who got flattened by 315 at the gym because he was too courageous.
Yeah, courage and stupidity. I guess there's a kind of trade-off relationship in that.
Yeah. Well, this is where you need to cultivate lots of different virtue in the gym, right? Like you need patience to sort of balance out courage.
Right. Okay. So you're saying with courage, it's like that's one area to strengthen. But if you only strengthen courage without strengthening patience and humility as well in that, then that can actually turn into almost like a vice. Would you say?
Yeah, exactly. That's Aristotle's whole point.
Right. Going too far one way starts to actually be the shadow side of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, this is something you see a lot, I think, in like the more mainstream fitness approach, where it's all about, grinding yourself into the dust and, don't worry about how you feel, just work hard and push yourself. And
like hustle culture.
Yeah. There's value in that. It's important to work hard and, be brave and persistent and diligent and all that. But you also need the opposite, right? To balance things out.
Right. Yeah, I think this starts to get into the area of the optimal grip, right? So I think, again, I'm trying to kind of bridge some of these ideas with Vervaeke. I don't want to get too conceptual and too out there, right? I don't want to alienate anybody. Yeah. But these ideas are something that have meant a lot to me and obviously to us that we discuss a lot. So let's maybe get into this idea of optimal grip and kind of how that ties into what we were just talking about. So what would you kind of say your understanding of optimal grip is?
The optimal grip. That's like, well, you can think of like a literal grip, like when you're gripping something, right? There's an optimal balance point somewhere in the middle, where if you don't want to squeeze it too hard, or else you're going to break it,
right?
But you also don't want to have too soft of a grip, or else you're going to drop it. So there's a middle point where you're grabbing with just the right amount of pressure. And yeah, I think there's something analogous in training where you want to be pushing yourself like just barely beyond like where you are, but also balancing it out with like a sensitivity to where you're at.
Yeah, I like that. So there's this like kind of aspirational element. And then this kind of sensitivity to where you are and kind of the felt experience of that kind of thing.
Yeah. And it's the tension between those two that gives you sort of that optimal middle point.
Right. Because I think the middle point, I loved, so John Vervaeke has the series Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, as both of us know, but I'm trying to kind of just open the people who might be listening up to that as well. And he has an episode on Buddhism where he talks a lot about the idea of the middle way, that some people can, maybe think it's like being Canadian, it's like, oh, it's a Canadian thing to do. Just always be in the center of everything, right?
Yeah.
And there's some confusion around that because I love John's metaphor of the nervous system, right? So it's like if you were always, like kind of calm and not stimulated and just completely in parasympathetic nervous system mode, you'd just be slow and just kind of, like sloth and not really, but then if you were always aroused all the time and always running around and stimulated, then you couldn't do that either. So you'd be dead.
Yeah.
So it's actually what you're saying is these opponent processing, these two sides of it that actually is supposed to give you attention that moves.
Well, a good metaphor is balance, like physical balance. Because Because one thing I emphasize a lot when I'm coaching people is that balance is not a static position in the middle, right?
Right.
It's a dynamic process that's always happening. It's like balance is a movement. It's not a position.
Mm.
And you can feel that. Like if you just get people to stand in front of the rack or something and just pay attention to the feeling of balance in their body.
Mm.
Like the first thing they always say is that, oh, I'm still moving.
So you're asking them to just stand still in front of the rack, and then they notice that they're still actually
Yeah, like
moving,
that.
right?
In order to balance, they have to always be moving just a little bit. They're always making these
Right.
little corrections. And I think that's a good metaphor for this tension, right? Like it's not about being perfectly in the middle. It's about a dynamic back and forth between the two.
Right, right. I see. Yeah, no, I like that too because, like, and what I like about this idea of the optimal grip is, like, again, how many areas it starts to get, like, to tie into, right? Like, how many levels it starts to reach? Because we can go to this cup where, you know, if I'm holding a water bottle, a plastic water bottle, and I squeeze really tight, it's just gonna, you know, all the water's gonna go everywhere. But if I hold too loose, it's gonna drop. Whereas it'll change if I'm holding like a teacup or a coffee or, you know, like a harder water bottle or like a baby versus, you know, like
Right.
it's always adjusting.
Yeah. So you need to be able to like adapt on the fly and to make those small adjustments as needed. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, what I like about this too is it ties into almost every aspect. Seems to have the I guess this comes into the Ian McGilchrist coincidence of opposites, right? Where
Right.
there's like this idea of there's always something on the other side that's keeping this one in balance. And even with like no matter what area you start to kind of bring this into, whether that's even like reading or learning, right? It's like, okay, reading is good, but you don't want to read so much that you're not doing.
Right.
But if you're doing all the time, like reading can actually give you insights into things. And
Yeah. Well, again, this is why the metaphor of physical balance is so potent. Because like I don't know, we could get into like the cognitive science and the like, conceptual metaphor theory and stuff like that. Or like, but I don't know if you want to get too abstract.
right, right. Well, we'll maybe save some for another podcast. I like that though, the balance element, because it makes me think of even yoga. Like, I mean, so we can bring in this idea too of John's ecology of practices. We can start to bring that in a little bit too. So he talks about this environment or this like ecology of practices, that there's no one practice. So with you, there's lifting, right? And so what are some other maybe practices that actually kind of support and bleed into that a little bit as well?
Well, meditation is like the big one, right?
Right.
Like you should have like a sitting mindfulness practice, a mindful moving practice, some kind of community practice. And I try to bring all of that stuff into both my own training and my coaching.
Right. Okay.
Like one thing I found useful is like after doing a heavy set or something, like you're breathing hard, you feel tightness in your chest, like just sitting down and just meditating on that. Just focusing on the breathing, on the feeling of tension in your chest, the whole physiological aspect of after doing something hard.
That's interesting. So after that kind of physical exertion, you take a moment to just kind of be with the experience of that physical exertion a little bit, rather than just moving on to something else really quickly.
Yeah.
Now, do you do that like kind of in between sets, like as your kind of like moment of rest? You also bring in the element of mindfulness and meditation into that?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So you're constantly moving between this physical exertion, meditation, embodiment, and then all of a sudden the embodiment of the almost the opposite tension,
Yeah.
which is the rest.
Yeah, exactly. Or the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, right?
Mm,
Like intentionally moving back and forth between the two.
right, right. And then I guess that's probably stretching kind of the, like each side, it's stretching each side a little bit. And then you're also probably noticing the tension between it.
Yeah, yeah. Like again, you're by exploring like each pole,
Hmm.
you're getting better at finding the optimal place in the middle.
Right, right. And actually, what that made me just think of is this idea between good and evil, right? Like, I don't want to get too high
Sure.
level, but this idea between good and evil, right? Like, if you go too far good, it reminds me of like the Buddhist wheel of
Mhm.
life, right? Where it's like once you start to get so high up, it's like the only way to go is back down. So,
Right.
like, almost like Jung's idea of like knowing the evil, knowing like the potential for evil inside you, and knowing the good, like those kind of play off of each other too.
Yeah, I think so. Where it's like ideally you just want the greatest amount of knowledge and experience or something, right?
Mm. So it'd almost be like you're leaving out half of the equation if you only focus on the one side.
Yeah, I think so.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. So maybe we can kind of move into, I guess, kind of where we met to and
Sure.
kind of how we came to be in an interaction, which was the circling into Dialogos practice with John.
Mhm.
So how did you kind of find that and decide to sign up for that?
Well, I've been following like Vervaeke's work for quite a few years, um, but it was all just on my own, right?
Hmm.
And he puts a lot of emphasis on finding community, finding people, and yeah, that's where I discovered that circling into Dialogos workshop thing. Um, yeah, and it was almost like a spur of the moment thing, and just whatever. I'm just going to try it out and see what happens. Uh, and yeah, that's how I met you and how I met Philip. And
Hmm.
yeah, it was a pretty great experience, I think.
Yeah, yeah, because I went into that and I had wanted to do it the year before, but there was
Yeah.
something a bit intimidating about it that I thought,
Mhm.
do I really grasp these concepts? And maybe I need this philosophical background. Maybe I need to understand all these terms. And like, I just felt like way in over my head, right?
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So, but yours was kind of a spur in the moment. Um, And then, so I guess there was these two elements. They bring in the circling, and then they have this dialectic into dialogos, this kind of more philosophical practice. So
Right.
I guess going into that, how did you feel about the circling process?
It was wildly uncomfortable to start with.
Right. Yeah.
Um, but again, like learning to be comfortable with discomfort
Mm,
is important. So, I found it very helpful in that way, right? Because they just like throw you into a room with some random person and give you a minute to try to get to know each other. And yeah, it was very, uh, like the first 3 or 4 were like super uncomfortable and
yeah.
weird, but then you slowly get into the flow of it. You slowly, you just get used to it and roll with it. And yeah, I found it very, very helpful.
Yeah. It's interesting. This idea of like, getting comfortable being uncomfortable. And again,
Mm.
it's like that could be, yeah, like lifting under heavy weights, or in this aspect, it's really interesting because it's like a social thing.
Mm.
Right? It's kind of like, okay, I'm one on one with this person that I've never met, I've never seen before, and they set it up so it's like you have an icebreaker. Do you remember what the first kind of couple were?
No, I don't.
Right. Yeah, there was a couple questions that they like, because they set it up to kind of break through the surface layers, right?
Yeah, no, are you supposed to say like right now, this is how I'm feeling sitting here with you or something like that?
Right, right. It's like being here with you now. I feel this, right? And
Right. Yeah.
that's super uncomfortable for people, I think, and even for me, and obviously for you, it was.
Mhm. Well,
Um,
it's weird because you're you're going into it body first. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Say more about
Like
that.
you're telling people, like, this is the feeling I have in my body. And
Mm.
like, that's not something you ever do like out in the real world, right?
The real world. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. I didn't really think about it like that you're going kind of body first.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not telling people what you think. You're telling
Yeah.
people what you feel right off the bat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a very, very different approach.
Hmm. Yeah, because I kind of came a little bit like I've done the circling more with Guy Sengstock, and
Yeah.
again I had Edwin on this channel, so I've done
Mm.
some of the empathy circle stuff, which is a bit more in that world, in that area. But
Right.
even so, it was still. It's always, I guess, there's always a bit of nervousness, a bit of kind of like, I don't know, excitement, anxiety in that, but I think it's so rewarding, and it almost seemed like it was like a tuning thing,
Mm.
like it's like a tuning you to your felt experience maybe.
Right. Yeah. Again, because we get so caught up in our thoughts, right?
Mm.
And we get so caught up in like what we're trying to get out of the conversation or something like that.
Right.
But yeah, to go into it body first, um, like it's almost a way of forcing people into the being mode.
Right,
Does
right.
that make sense?
Yeah. So let's briefly do the having being mode.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, how do you see that?
So that's Eric Fromm, right? This idea that there are two psychological modes that people have. One is the having mode and one is the being mode. And so the having mode is all about having things. It's accumulating resources. So like, you need to have air and food and water and shelter and stuff like that. And then there's the being mode, which is all about, being present in your own subjective experience. It's just being.
And then there's the confusion part of it as well.
Right. Yeah, because you can confuse because you have needs in both, right? You have having needs and you have being needs. And your being needs are your need to like grow and become a more competent person,
Mm-hmm.
and you need like again air, food, water, shelter, stuff like that. But you can confuse the two, where you think you're trying to address your being needs within the having mode. I think that's how it's put.
Yeah. So what would that look like, I guess? Do you have any examples?
Like, wanting to be more successful or whatever, wanting to become a certain type of person. And so you go out and you buy a bunch of stuff. And this is obviously very prevalent in our culture these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it's all about trying to convince people that they can address these being needs by buying stuff.
Right. Yeah. Like the advertising industry really, I guess, they capitalize on that modal confusion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think John's a couple metaphors that come to mind for me is, yeah, like the idea of becoming more mature. It's like you buy a car thinking that that's going to make you more mature, right? Or what was his other one? Oh yeah, well, like of course the classic. You have a need for love, so you think that, oh, I'm just going to have a lot of sex,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Instead of like making love, it's having. So even in the language itself, it starts to portray this modal confusion.
Yeah, even like social media, like you're just collecting friends right? Rather than actually, being a friend. You're just collecting them.
Right. Yeah, I didn't really think about that. It's like, yeah, I have 500 friends on Facebook, but it's like,
Yeah.
how many friends are you like being a friend to?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's one thing I've found that's been, I guess, a challenge to the idea of the podcast. And I think you
Mhm.
mentioned it too, of like maybe doing like a bit of digital marketing, and I find that really tangling, right? Of to
Mhm.
not fall into that having mode of wanting, likes or attention on it, because I guess for me, there's often an intrinsic motivation, but
Yep.
then sometimes it's like you can get caught up in it, and I have to be careful not to fall into that extrinsic.
Yeah, like it flips on you uh, so quickly, and so
Hmm.
like it's so easy to not see it happen.
Right. Yeah, it's so subtle. Like all of a sudden it can
Mhm.
be, and I think there's even like a bit of nesting in them, right? It's like you can do it for an
Yeah, yeah,
intrinsic value, which is, for me, the intrinsic value for this podcast was kind of goes back to what we're talking about too, right? Of being comfortable, being uncomfortable, right? And
right.
for me, our conversations have always been great, but the idea of recording them, putting them out there, and also I
Right.
don't know, like being seen on social media, but then there's also an element of like, am I seen wanting to be seen, is a little bit of a weird
Yeah.
meta version where it's like I don't want to be seen or want the attention in that way, but it's to also, I guess, share ideas and thoughts in hopes that maybe other people will resonate, maybe
Right. Yeah.
someone will get something out of it that I did, and maybe, just kind of relate in that way, right?
Mhm. Yeah, it's so easy for it to like become this infinite regression of complexity where you're just doubting your doubt about your doubt about.
Yeah, like turning the mirror on in itself kind of thing.
Yeah, or like did you see that Bo Burnham Inside?
Yeah, I think Philip sent
There's
us
that
that.
that one scene where he's like critiquing his critique of his critique of his critique.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that
it's
was really
yeah,
interesting.
it's easy to fall into that on social media.
Hmm. Well, I think even for me, sometimes even self-awareness, right? Like, I think self-awareness is good, but sometimes it like, again, John talks about like the glasses metaphor, right? Like,
Right.
mindfulness being taking off the glasses and cleaning them and looking at them kind of thing and inspecting them, and then contemplation being putting them back on and seeing through the glasses. Whereas
Right.
I think if you're always in that reflective, meditative kind of state, it's like you're almost outside your experience and you're not actually
Mhm.
embodied in it.
Yeah, again, it's the whole like optimal grip. You want to find the
Hmm.
correct, the optimal balance between the two.
Hmm. Yeah, because he talks about the having a meditation practice and then a
Mhm.
contemplation practice,
Yeah.
which is something. Okay, so we talked about the circling a little bit, where it's more like this relating. It's building
Mhm.
this. Again, bringing in the language that we've introduced in this episode is bringing in this philia, right? This like
Right. Yeah.
horizontal element between people. And then what happens after the circling?
Oh, that's where we move into like the philosophical fellowship, right?
Yeah.
That's where you try to build on that like horizontal connection. Um, yeah, where you like it becomes a like a lens to see more deeply into the world or something like that.
Hmm. Right, I like that. Yeah. So it builds this connection, this kind of like, it seems like it's like a movement or momentum. It kind
Mhm.
of builds this flow, I guess maybe is a word
Yeah.
for it. And then you start to turn it towards philosophical texts or and virtue, which John brings in. So it's like it starts to create this
Yeah.
horizontal and then it starts to turn vertical. So
Yeah, exactly.
the philosophical fellowship, obviously, like that's a practice that we do together. But
Right.
could you describe that a little bit of what that's like?
Mm. It's um, it's a challenge. It's like yeah, when you get into that flow with like the three of us when we do it, um, yeah, it's pretty incredible the weird places you find yourself, especially um, again as a jazz musician. I like the way that we do it, where
Hmm.
it's very free flowing, very free form. We often go into it without a pre-plan, and we just kind of go and see. We follow it and see where we end up. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to describe, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, because for us, I think we've kind of fallen into this place where we've built philia between us. We built this kind of like friendship. I mean, at this point, I'd like to call you a friend.
Mm.
So we've kind of built this, yeah, I guess movement between us. So I think we can kind of fall into these spaces where, again, I think there's certain things that help that process.
Mhm.
Like we kind of give each other spaces to pause and a lot of quiet, actually, which is surprising how much space can really draw stuff out.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's like a really important part of it too, I think, is like allowing space, allowing quiet. I think that's something um, like culturally we are very uncomfortable with,
Mm.
like allowing space in a conversation. Uh, People immediately feel like it's awkward. They immediately try to fill the silence with anything just to get out of it. Um, yeah, just like allowing it once in a while, I think.
Yeah, it's a weird thing because again, I like the music metaphor for it. It's
Mm.
weird to bring it into recording in the podcast version because I feel this tension between the idea that it's a podcast, and I feel like there's an obligation to keep attention flowing and to kind of make it interesting and continue that. But yet I feel that in a tension with actually some of the wisest words or ideas or the best things come from like quiet silence and pauses.
Mm.
And there's this like, I notice this tendency for me to, there's like two responses that I get. And it's almost like these, like I'm holding my hands on my head and kind of near my heart area for anyone who's listening. And it's like, I have a response that comes from my head that seems quick.
Right.
And it can be kind of witty or it can be kind of just, I don't know, intellectual or conceptual. But if you pause, there's this like deeper part of you
Mm.
that actually wants to respond and that will respond if you trust the pause.
Mm. Yeah, like the whole embodied aspect of it,
Hmm.
like uh, like talking about cognitive science, right? Like especially embodied cognition, like a lot of your thinking, a lot of like it's all bodily, right?
Hmm.
Like we're like it's challenging the whole like brain as just a computer thing. It's like no, you're a fully integrated being, and your body is an important part of uh, how you think. And so sometimes you need to just be quiet and pay attention.
Yeah, I like that. It's kind of like I guess it reminds me of two things. One being something that like provides more information, right? So it's like you can have the information that's in your head, but you can also use it as something to provide you more information, right? You can
Right.
get more information about the world and about your experience and about yourself through this, meat suit body kind of thing. And then it makes me think of um, also this idea of, oh, I lost it. I lost it. Yeah, yeah, it's gone. So yeah, I guess this attuning to the body and it kind of can give you signs and signals of more
Mhm.
information.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, and I think this is why, like a movement practice,
Mm,
like lifting or like yoga or qigong or whatever, where you're attuning yourself to your body. You're
hmm.
practicing paying attention to it.
Yeah, yeah, no, I like how that ties back into the lifting element
Mhm.
and all of that, right? So yeah, no, I've been enjoying this idea of like the Dialogos and Yumi and Philip. It seems like inexhaustible, right? Like it's like we sit down, what is it? Pretty much once a week. I mean, we skip some weeks here and there,
Yeah.
but we sit down in a group and generally we don't have a topic in mind, but then every once in a while
Yeah.
we will run through the processes or the practices anyway of the philosophical fellowship, which is around a text, and then the circle or the dialectic into Dialogos, which is a very structured, a structured thing. So maybe let's talk about that quickly. We won't talk about it too much. But this process of dialectic into Dialogos seems like an intimidating word soup, right? So
Yeah.
I guess how would you describe it?
So like the dialectic, it's right. It's like taking two, maybe not necessarily opposing perspectives, but two different perspectives, and putting them together, trying to synthesize them. And then dialogos is when that process becomes like self-organizing, right? It becomes, like a dynamic flow state between people. Something like that anyway.
Yeah. So let's maybe kind of paint the picture of what the practice itself looks like. I think I'd like to one day do one with you, me, and Philip, and actually post it if you guys are down, because I think it would be. Yeah. It's an interesting thing to share. It's a bit of a weird thing because it's taking something that's kind of intimate. I mean, kind of like podcasting. We're taking this conversation and sharing it. But so the process of it itself, like, so how is it kind of set up? So there's generally 4 roles, right?
Right. What are they again?
So there's the proposer or the speaker.
Right.
Right. So they're kind of sharing, and John makes a point that the proposal is a big part of it. And there's almost this understanding of like, by putting out this proposal, that it's going to be shattered. Whatever your definition is, whatever you think that it's going to be, it's going to be wrong. It's not going to be full, but that's kind of the point, right? So there's that proposer.
Yeah. Well, and there's like almost like a ritualistic aspect to it where you have to say that, like, I propose that, right? You have to, like, embody it. You have to like really, like it has to be coming from like a deeper place or something.
Yeah. Like you have to actually like kind of believe what you are, like, to your best ability. This is what I propose, what I deeply think that this aspect is. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're putting that out there to be broken.
Right. So then an example of that. So generally we would pick a virtue, which John says is the important part, right? Of like, you choose a virtue, we say courage, right? And then if you were, say, the speaker or the proposer, you would say then, like, I propose, like, what would an example of a proposal for courage maybe be? Not to put you on the spot, but.
Yeah, so you'd say something like, I propose that courage is the capacity to do things that are hard and uncomfortable and scary or something like that.
Right. So then that would be the proposer role. And then there would be a, what's the other one? Is it like
listener?
The listener or the reflector, whatever you want to call that, whatever that role is. And then, so if I were to be that role in this position, I would then kind of reflect that back to you and then start to almost do Socratic questioning and to kind of inquire deeper, to kind of pull you out more and to kind of get more of what you think about that.
Right.
And then there would be the third role is the scribe.
Right. Yeah.
So they would be, go ahead.
They just write down the conversation more or less, so that you can then go back through it and like reflect on the process of how you got there.
Right. They kind of track it as it moves and shifts and transforms.
Yeah.
And then there was a fourth role that they added, which was the herald. Do you remember what that one was kind of about?
I don't, because they didn't have that when we did it, right?
Right. So I think, that was added after our workshop. I think that one, they call, like, there's the scribe and the vibe. They call it like the, so it's like they're kind of more paying attention to what happens, again, almost like energetically. It's like, oh, I noticed you got really excited when this idea happened, and then when this happened, your arms went like this, and then he was copying you, and then they kind of describe what's kind of going on.
Yeah, like paying attention to the bodily aspect of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's these 4 roles, and then if you were to say, do that proposal, then I would start to inquire about like, oh, like, you know, the scary elements and like, what does bravery have to do, or like kind of pick out certain aspects of what you say and just get curious and just practice kind of zooming in and double clicking on kind of what you're saying, right?
Yeah, like it's not about tearing it apart. It's about exploring deeper into it.
Yeah, I like that you said that, because I think that's where some of the philia and relational aspects can come into it, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to prove someone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You want to explore with them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And then, so then we do, I think it was like 10 minutes of that, right? Like a round.
Something like that. Yeah.
And then, so once that kind of happens, then we all kind of rotate. And then the person who was reflecting then becomes the proposer.
Right.
So then I would take what you said and all the reflections that came before it in the last round. And then I would kind of like, it's almost like, again, this idea of the logos being like that which gathers things together so that they belong together.
Right.
And so then I move through and I take the last round, all of what you proposed, what I inquired, what the scribe reflected back, and what the vibe reflected us back with all the movement. And I would take that whole thing and then do a new proposal.
Mm.
And each round, it seems to kind of transcend the last one.
Yeah. Yeah. You just get deeper and deeper into it. You know what? You go around like 2 or 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And every time you do it, yeah, you just get a little farther into it.
Yeah, and then I like the metaphor of the fire, right? So it's like what this is doing is essentially almost structuring the fire.
Yeah.
And the logos being like the fire, where you don't really make a fire happen. You can kind of build a fire as best you can, and then when you spark it, depending on the conditions, it will either light, or if it's raining out, if you don't make the conditions right, it won't kind of catch, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Like it catches fire. Like you're intentionally trying to build a thing between everybody, right? Like it's that the group becomes its own entity. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and it starts to take on a life of its own, and then it starts to move from this thing that's being forced or like kind of tryingness, and then all of a sudden it starts to catch, where there's this like energy and almost this like collective cognition starts to come into it, where you kind of say something and then the other person is like right there with you, and then you're all kind of plugged into this thing in the middle. And it just starts to spin and gather together. And then once that process goes for whatever it is, the 4 rounds or 3 rounds, then you can kind of open it up into free speech.
Right. Yeah. And that's where things get more like jazz.
Right. I like that. And then you're just kind of playing music together at that point.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you're kind of going and it's burning, the fire's going, and then, you know, you can kind of go for a long period of time at that point.
Yeah, until you hit aporia, right? And then it stops.
Right. So what is aporia?
That's it's this right here. You don't know. You don't know what to say. You don't know where to go next. You don't know. Yeah, like when you're trying to define courage or whatever, you're going to hit a point where it stops and you just don't know where to go from there. And yeah, that's like an important part of the process of it, right? Again, this idea that there's important value in silence.
I'm going to let that linger for a second. And I'm imagining myself, as someone who might be listening to this in their car, or, and with their little headphones, maybe going on a walk or something. And this aporia is uncomfortable, right?
Yeah, very much so.
And not knowing where to go next, not knowing which step to take, what the next right move is,
Yeah.
can be, what would you say that feeling is?
I mean, it's just uncomfortable. It's, this feeling of tension almost.
Mm-hmm. And so what would you say is important about that?
Like I tend to take the Buddhist perspective that allowing space is what allows things to come into existence, right? Where like if you're just filling a conversation with random noise, right? There's no room for more important, meaningful things to come into being. So when you allow silence, you allow space, you allow emptiness, you're creating space for more important things to come into existence.
Yeah, I think that's something where that realization has kind of bled into other parts, right? It's like sometimes I think about that with life, like busyness, being busy and productive and always being on the go one place after another. But I don't think that that's bad. But it seems like there's a realization here of what we're talking about, of space almost allows for creativity, like a creative force.
Yeah, it's a whole, like it's a half of creativity is empty space, right?
Almost like the canvas to which you paint on.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can't paint without a canvas. You need the empty space.
I think that was well said. I think it feels like maybe a natural place to come to a close for this version of the conversation.
Sure.
So again, let's just revisit quick the Metanoia Barbell. So that's the business that you run. You do coaching for strength training and lifting. So you have a website?
Yeah. That's about it though.
Yeah.
I'm still learning about the whole business side of things. I'm a good coach, but not a great businessman. So I'm developing those skills.
Right, for sure. Well, no, I really appreciate this conversation. I think we'll definitely have to do it again. So again, Metanoia Barbell. There'll be a website out. You got like some good blogs out there. I really enjoy your writing. You got stuff on Bruce Lee with water, and what's the guy's name who pushes the rock up the Sisyphus?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So some great stuff. So yeah, no, I really appreciate this conversation and joining me in this Dialogos, this adventure together where we explored a lot of topics.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I'll end the recording here, and then we can just kind of chat after that a little bit. So again, Neil, thank you for joining me.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you to anyone out there still listening after, what is it, like an hour, 45 minutes. That's an achievement in itself. So for anyone out there, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.